In that instant, the courtroom wasn't just a place of rules. It became a stage for courage, fear, and raw injustice. But when the judge asked a question, the words slipped out of his mouth. Bold, unshakable. "I'm my mom's lawyer." Gasps echoed across the room, whispers spread, and the walls of justice suddenly felt charged with tension. He was just a little boy, clutching his mother's hand, stepping into a courtroom that seemed far too big, far too intimidating for someone his age. No one expected him to speak. No one expected him to challenge authority. What happened next would shock everyone present and reveal truths that society still struggles to face. Could a child's voice really confront the weight of the law and survive unscathed? This is the story they didn't see coming. Before we dive into this suspenseful story, drop a comment with your city so we can see how far it reaches. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe my channel. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the city, and 7-year-old Elijah Harper was getting ready for school. His backpack, slightly too big for his small frame, bounced against his back as he tied his shoes. At home, his mother, Carla, reviewed papers at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed with concern over bills and work schedules. Elijah knew the routine: breakfast, a quick hug, and off to the bus stop, where he'd greet friends and chat about cartoons and homework. Life was simple, predictable, safe. Or so it seemed. Elijah wasn't like other kids in his neighborhood. He was sharp, observant, and carried a seriousness beyond his age. His mother often joked that he had the soul of a lawyer trapped in a child's body, always questioning, always defending. At school, teachers admired his intelligence, while classmates sometimes marveled at his boldness. But outside the safety of the classroom and their cozy apartment, the city carried undercurrents Elijah could sense, but not yet understand. Whispers of bias, fleeting stares, and the subtle ways people judged before they knew. That morning, the phone rang unexpectedly, its shrill tone cutting through the calm. Carla answered, her voice steady, but Elijah sensed the tension creeping in. An invitation, a summons, a demand. It was all of those things wrapped into one. They were being called to the courthouse, a place Elijah had only seen on field trips. He didn't yet know the courtroom could be both intimidating and dangerous, a place where authority might clash with courage. As they prepared to leave, Elijah straightened his little tie, adjusted his jacket, and whispered to himself, "I've got this." But even in that moment of quiet determination, neither he nor Carla realized that stepping into that courtroom would ignite a chain of events testing bravery, exposing injustice, and forcing a little boy to rise in ways the world rarely expects from children. The stakes were higher than they could imagine. The eyes of everyone watching would soon witness something extraordinary, something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about courage, fairness, and the weight of one child's voice. Elijah clutched his mother's hand as they entered the courthouse, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off the marble floors. The air smelled of polished wood, and fear disguised as formality. People turned their heads, eyes lingering a moment, too long, curiosity tinted with judgment. Carla tried to smile reassuringly at her son, but her knuckles tightened around his hand. This wasn't just another visit. Something about the way the court clerk glanced at them made her chest tighten. As they approached the judge's bench, Elijah's heart pounded in his small chest. The room, with its towering ceilings and solemn portraits, felt enormous. Lawyers whispered, papers shuffled, and the hum of murmured conversations created a backdrop of tension. When the judge finally looked up, his gaze was sharp, calculating, almost cold. Elijah noticed the slight narrowing of his eyes when they met his mother's. Then, unmistakably, when they met his own. Carla began to speak, presenting her case with practiced calm, citing documents and explaining their situation. But the judge interrupted, his tone clipped, dismissive. "Are you aware of the regulations?" he asked. Though his words seemed routine, there was a weight behind them. A subtle bias Elijah could feel, even at 7. He watched as his mother struggled to remain composed, answering every question with patience and precision. Yet, the judge seemed determined to question every claim, every right, as if their very presence in the courtroom was a challenge to the system itself. Elijah's small voice trembled as he stepped forward, repeating the phrase that would shock the room. "I'm my mom's lawyer." The courtroom fell silent. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, whispers traveled like wildfire. Some people stared, in disbelief. Others smirked, perhaps thinking a child's audacity could be dismissed as cute or irrelevant. But Elijah's words carried weight, a mixture of innocence and unyielding courage that even the judge couldn't ignore. The tension escalated as objections were raised, arguments became heated, and every statement seemed to magnify the subtle currents of prejudice running through the room. The judge leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to regain control. Still, each time he opened his mouth, Elijah's voice cut through, precise, unshakable, a small figure challenging authority with logic and heart. At one point, a courtroom assistant whispered to Carla, a warning masked as casual advice. "Don't let him get too involved. It could backfire." But Elijah had already noticed the stares, the barely concealed impatience, and the invisible walls of bias tightening around them. Every passing second made it clear. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a confrontation with a system that often judged children, families, and people of color before hearing a single word. The audience in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Phones subtly raised to record. A journalist's notebook flipped faster than usual, and the tension seemed to thicken, making each heartbeat deafening. Elijah felt it all, the fear, the injustice, but also a strange clarity. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every child who had ever been underestimated, every parent who had felt the weight of prejudice, every family forced to navigate a world where courage is demanded before safety is guaranteed. And just when it seemed the judge might finally assert his authority, a sudden interruption echoed through the chamber. The doors swung open, footsteps approaching, and the tension snapped higher than anyone could have predicted. Eyes darted toward the entrance. Whispers turned into gasps. Something, or someone, was coming that no one had anticipated. Elijah's hands clenched the papers he held, his mind racing, the weight of the moment pressing down, and he realized nothing in this courtroom, nothing in his young life, had prepared him for what was about to happen next. The courtroom air crackled as the judge's gavel slammed down, echoing like a warning. Elijah stood firm, tiny hands gripping the papers, his voice unwavering, but the room seemed to tilt against him. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and for the first time, his tone carried something heavier than authority. It carried disbelief, impatience, and a subtle contempt. "A child cannot represent an adult in this court," he said, each word deliberate, sharp, a blade cutting through the fragile courage Elijah had mustered. Carla felt her heart tighten, her breath catching. Every word the judge spoke seemed designed to belittle, to remind them both that the IB law was not always blind, that justice could be twisted by prejudice. Elijah's small frame trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. His mother's eyes met his, silent encouragement passing between them, a lifeline in the storm of judgment. Then the prosecutor spoke, his tone cool, clinical, but underlined with something darker. Doubt cast not on the facts, but on their worthiness, their place, their right even to stand there. Every objection, every sneer, every sideways glance from the jury reminded Elijah that the world often saw him first as a child, second as a boy of color, and last as someone who could command respect. He swallowed hard, straightened his tie, and spoke again, each word precise, deliberate. The Bowie courtroom seemed to lean in, breaths held, time slowing. He laid out the facts, cited his mother's rights, and for a fleeting moment, the room was silent. Too silent. Then, as if the air could no longer contain the tension, murmurs rose, whispers spreading like wildfire. People exchanged glances, some in awe, others in disbelief. The judge's face tightened, his authority challenged in a way no one expected. Suddenly, a sharp cough echoed through the chamber. A senior lawyer, previously silent, stood and nodded toward Elijah. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but it carried immense weight. A subtle acknowledgement that courage, truth, and reason could not be dismissed by age, by size, or by skin color. The courtroom shifted. The balance of power trembled. And in that heartbeat, Elijah realized he was not alone. Every injustice he had feared could be confronted. Every subtle prejudice, every whispered doubt, now faced a reckoning. The judge's gavel lifted once more, the sound lingering like a question. Eyes locked on Elijah, on Carla, on the tiny figure who had stood taller than anyone expected. For a moment, the world felt suspended. Would the law bend to courage? Or would it crush it, leaving memory and lessons as the only evidence of bravery? The answer hung in the air, waiting to unfold, as every person in that courtroom held their breath, and the story teetered on the edge of the unimaginable. When the gavel finally fell, the courtroom exhaled as one, though the weight of the moment lingered far beyond the echo. Elijah's tiny shoulders sagged in relief, but his eyes remained wide, absorbing everything he had just faced. Carla wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, tears streaming silently. The victory was more than legal. It was personal, a statement that courage, truth, and determination could pierce even the thickest walls of bias. But even in that triumph, the memory of the judge's doubt, the whispers of skepticism, and the weight of societal prejudice pressed on them. Walking out into the sunlight, Elijah felt the warmth differently. He had faced a system that often underestimated people like him, that dismissed children, and worse, that sometimes judged families by the color of their skin before ever hearing their words. The experience had changed him, not just giving him confidence, but a deep understanding that injustice doesn't always come with overt hostility. Sometimes it wears the mask of rules, procedure, and the assumption that some voices matter less. Carla looked down at her son, her heart swelling with pride and fear all at once. She realized that moments like these, though rare, shaped the future. Elijah had learned a lesson that extended far beyond the courtroom, that even the smallest, seemingly powerless voice could confront authority, could stand up to bias, and could force change if only courage was allowed to rise. The story of that day traveled beyond their city. Videos circulated online. People shared their shock, their admiration, their anger. Some commented, moved by a child's bravery. Others reflected on the realities of prejudice they had overlooked. It became more than Elijah's story. It became a mirror to society. A reminder that racial injustice isn't confined to history books or headline news. It is alive, persistent, subtle, and in need of challenge from those willing to speak up. Elijah kept going to school, playing with friends, and carrying on as any child would. But he was no longer just a boy. He was a symbol of resilience, a small voice that had made a room full of authority. Pause and reconsider. Every time he whispered to himself, "I've got this," it wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet rebellion against a world that too often underestimates courage and underrepresents fairness. And now, as you watch this story unfold, consider this. How many more voices are waiting for the chance to speak? How many times does bravery need to be proven before the world truly listens? Share this story, reflect on it, and remember, standing up in the face of injustice, big or small, can change lives, inspire hearts, and slowly reshape the world.